puts, in my mind, more pressure on the test automation. Hey, Brad. Welcome to a little bonus episode of How Many CTOs Does It Take?
Yeah.
Yeah, so everyone out there listening, we just spent a little bit of time doing some coding with an AI agent. You can go over to our YouTube channel. Just go over to YouTube, look for How Many CTOs Does It Take? I don't think there's more than one of them out there, so you'll
It's
find
how many
us.
CTOs does it take pod?
Okay, how
But
many
we'll
CTOs does it
link
take pod?
we'll link the video in the show notes of this little mini bonus episode that we're going to record here as a podcast.
We're just going to tell you about what we just experienced. We just tried to take the How Many CTOs podcast website and update it a little bit. And the AI did well at first. And then we asked it to do a second task and it kind of went down a rabbit hole,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And, I thought to myself, this is interesting. You could see an engineer spending a lot of time tugging at the AI, trying to get it to do the thing, as opposed to just stopping and saying, all right, I'm just going to code this part myself.
Yeah.
I can't seem to get the AI to do what I wanted to do. But then that brings up something interesting, which you talked about, which is getting the AI to do writing it myself means I have to know what I want to do and how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, we did this little experiment as kind of a follow-up from our interview with Michael Nankin, and one of the things that he said, which I thought was really it resonated with me, was this notion that um, the AI can get stuck. It can get grounded on the thing it gave you, and the more you press on it to try to do something different, it just kind of gets more and more entrenched, and sometimes you have to say, forget that. I'm going to give you a new instruction. And it to me, I think there's two things that are required from the engineer, that was us in this case, to know how to operate the AI agent. And the first one is knowing that if you just keep pestering it and badgering it, it will just get more and more stuck in a rut. And so knowing that you have to stop when that happens and reset, that's like thing number one. And then thing number two is kind of what I think you just said, which is you also have to know really what you want, and you need to be able to give it clear instructions about how you want it to go actually solve the thing that it's stuck on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you guys can watch the video, but in this particular case, the thing that is an interesting thing that neither Scott or I had thought about, I don't, because I've never tried to build a website for a podcast before, and so the idea of we wanted to basically add a link to listen to the episode on Apple Podcasts or listen to the episode on Spotify, and getting the AI didn't immediately know, given our that we gave it the page, the show page on Spotify and the show page on Apple Podcasts. It didn't know how to map that onto the episodes, right? And that's probably a case where, as engineers, we need to go understand how that was going to work anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and if we were going to code it ourselves, we'd have to understand that and come up with a plan for that. And the AI wasn't any better at knowing how to solve that problem without us giving it better instructions.
Yeah, there's like I don't know how to describe what the limitation is, but there's some sort of limitation about what it doesn't know everything about the world. It isn't like omniscient.
Right. Right.
So there's another thought, you shared this idea of, stopping and starting over again. And really, when you're AI or no AI, sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you have to say, I need to stop. You kind of get in a tug of war with what you're doing, you get stuck on it. And my experience was I would have to stop and go do something else, work on something else, sometimes take a day or two. Um, Sometimes you got to like let your subconscious mind do its work to see the problem in a different way, as opposed to
Yeah.
just continuing to pound, 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 pound
Right.
in order
Totally.
to
Totally.
get to the answer.
Yeah. So in some sense, you're saying that it's also as human, like, flesh and blood intelligence, we also sometimes need to stop and do a reset as well.
For sure. I've
Yeah.
had that experience many times,
Yeah.
which is like,
For sure.
I can't figure this out. I'm just going to stop and walk away and just, I don't know. I find when I'm either walking the dog or doing the dishes, that seems to be when problems get
The
solved.
epiphanies come.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just not thinking about it, but the brain, no, the background processor's thinking about it, our
Yeah.
human background processor.
Another thing that happened in our little coding session that we had there that I thought was really interesting for you, like I was just like, hey, let's just give it some instructions and hit the go button and see what it comes up with. Because I kind of
Hmm.
just wanted to see it run and just kind of give it, kind of free reign to go do whatever it wanted to.
Hmm.
And I felt confident that whatever it came up with, I would be able to evaluate to be like, does that make sense?
Hmm.
But you had a reaction to that. You were like a little bit. You want to what was that reaction that you were having? When you were like, hey, I want to wait. What code is it changing and what's it doing?
Yeah, I guess, in my work in my career as an engineer, an engineer coding, I don't think I was ever the best engineer, but I think one of the things I learned or I had come naturally, but I'm not sure which one, was to pay attention to detail and to know every line of my code and how it was working.
Yeah,
Um, and that was a way, I guess, that I tried to ensure quality, is to be really thoroughly familiar with what was there. Um, and then I think it gave me an advantage, as I say, moved into more like a lead type of role or whatever, which is when people wanted to change the system, I knew it really well, how it worked in detail.
yep,
And so when we just asked the bot, like, go do this thing, and it made a bunch of changes, I felt uncomfortable. I was like, well, wait a second, how I don't know what this code does anymore. And so
right,
then when like, if somebody comes to me and says, "Hey Scott, can the website do this now?" In that world where I was very intimately familiar with the code, I could say, "Well, yes," because I could already see in my mind how I would change it to make it do that.
yeah.
And now, to be fair, I'd never seen this website before you wrote it. So you knew it was there. This was the first time I
I
saw it.
mean,
But
I didn't really write very much of it. It's a very thin template of a blog platform using Svelte. That's it.
I,
It's not a lot of
I
it's not a lot of genius going on there.
I understand, but even still, I did feel a little bit of like feeling. It was a feeling in me, which is like, oh, I'm feeling uncomfortable with not knowing what this is doing to my
Yeah,
code. And
totally.
I think if I use this now, there's still going to be a pull request, right, and a merge. And so I think in a world where there was more of this going on, I would find myself wanting to spend more time with pull requests. I worked
Yeah,
at a place once where we had an expectation, a working agreement, we called it, that if you were doing a PR, I'm sorry, if you were reviewing a PR, you would actually pull the code down and run it on your machine locally. That was kind of just you can think of it as a form of QA that we put in place, right?
sure.
And it didn't happen always. It was an expectation, but you can imagine there were lots of cases where someone just looked at it and said, "This is fine," and didn't feel compelled to do that. And but you could see the importance of practices like that
Yeah,
now.
yeah. Well, and I think that it's interesting that you say that tension. Like it makes a ton of sense and I feel like this is a little bit of what we talked about with Michael, that idea of, um, you know, the maybe junior engineer, but maybe this happens even with veteran engineers. Like I don't consider myself a junior engineer. I've been doing this
You
a
just
little
look it.
while.
It's just the way you look.
I just
It's
look
the
like a
baby
junior
face,
engineer.
the baby
Yeah.
face.
Um, but yeah, I had a reaction of like, I have trust in this thing. I've played around with it enough. I know what I just asked it to. And it gave us a really good plan, right? Like you kind of said like before we asked it to do what we asked it to do, right? Which was just to, essentially embed and display the RSS feed for our podcast instead of just having a link to our podcast host. Um, it came up with the plan that seemed like the right plan, right? Like you and I've talked about this. Like when you're going to go
Hmm.
write some code, the first thing you got to do is you got to have a plan. Like,
Hmm.
what are we going to probably do? It's going to download the RSS and then parse it and put that in some HTML, right? So it had the right plan, and that was believable. And then it coded it, but it wrote like 300 lines of code, and
Hmm.
your reaction to that was like, what? What? Like,
Yeah. Another thing it taught me, it puts in my mind more pressure on the test automation. Or whatever,
yeah,
phrase differently, it puts more pressure on the QA practices that you have, whatever they are, whether they're test automation or human or whatever you got, however you do QA, right? It puts more pressure on that.
yeah, that's fair. You know, another thing that is interesting is in its first implementation, right?
Hmm.
Like, if people can go with check the video because it's interesting. Like, it gave us some code, and like we went and loaded the web page first. I didn't even, like, no, Scott, let's just run it. I just want
Hmm.
to run it. Let's see what it does. And it generated an error, and the error message was, oh, something has gone wrong. Here's a link to the hosted site. And
Hmm.
I actually thought that was kind of clever. And I'm not even sure, like, we didn't ask it to do that. And I'm not sure if I had coded it myself, if I would have necessarily thought to do that error handling that way, you know?
No, but it
Um,
said it was going to do that.
oh, it did say that in its
It
plan.
did say in the plan that it would handle errors. Yeah,
Right. I wasn't sure how it was going to handle the errors, And
I wasn't
so,
either. Yeah.
yeah, but to me, I do think that this is just one more example of like, I mean, I think it did better work than I would have expected a junior engineer to do with the same level of instruction that we gave it. It basically,
That's for sure.
right?
We gave it 3 sentences.
Yeah, we gave it 3 sentences and it came back with a pretty solid plan. So,
Hmm. And then we gave it a slightly more complicated ask, which technically was probably impossible,
might have
and
been impossible with what we gave it,
couldn't do it.
and it couldn't do it.
All right. Well,
All right, this was fun.
until next time,
All right.
this is how many CTOs does it take?
All right, Scott, talk to you later.
This episode of How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast was edited by Saffron Eftigao. Our theme song was AI generated by Brad. Please follow us on all the social media platforms at How Many CTOs Pod. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, X, TikTok, and Patreon, or at our website at howmanyctospod.com. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. Thanks for listening.